Today, we're looking at Diamine Amber, a yellow ink. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Diamine Amber is a yellow ink, which makes you say no. Why would you use it? Before we get to the writing sample, let's take a look at those sciencey bits. Up first is a chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down, I dunk it into the water, and I let it rise up. We see that we get a solid yellow all the way. This is not a watery yellow ink. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into the water for that 10 to 15 seconds. It looks the same. Now with very light inks, you don't normally get a lot of water resistance, and this has none. Resistance tests are done to see how I can expect this ink to hold up on paper, as well as how difficult it might be to clean from the pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it's gone. Because it's a light ink and that is a extra fine nib, it disappears. Don't do it. Looking at the highlighter, because it's such a light ink written with an extra fine nib, it disappears. I wouldn't do it, but then again, I might not take my notes in yellow. Now water completely reactivates it and pulls it totally off the page. The same thing happens with bleach. Completely reactivated, completely gone. Pen flush, gone. But the interesting thing when I'm looking at this smear is I see a lot of a brown coming out from this yellow. And that's something interesting later on. Now this is a bell curve, or a normal distribution. For the 365 inks tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5. Normal is the range from 2.1 to 2.9. Diamine Amber has a viscosity of 1.64. That makes it very wet, which is good with it being so light. We need to put a lot of ink down for this one. Now this bell curve is for the average dry time. For the 365 inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds. Normal for dry time is between 13 and 21 seconds. Diamine Amber has an average dry time of 14 seconds, which is good that it's on the faster side because of it being wetter and drying just a little bit on the fast side of normal, it gets to stay in place and actually be readable. Because yellow ink seems like you should be afraid of it. To find my average dry time, I average the extra fine and a medium nib on my writing samples done on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. Now let's look at the writing sample. I got this ink in sample form, and to keep writing samples consistent, as I always do, I'm using a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub. I'm using a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium nib and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine nib. Let's start out with Clairefontaine. So I would not have normally gone after a yellow ink. I have found yellow inks are often incredibly disappointing and hard to read. But as I've been just testing a whole bunch, I went ahead and I got it. So when we look at the Clairefontaine, it's a very light paper. We get no bleed, no ghosting. We don't expect it. It's a very light ink. Looking at the 1.1, the 1.1 at the top, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, but a bunch of color variation. It gets very dark in spots. That yellow turns almost orangey when we have enough of the ink down. So if you're using a wet writing pen, that's what you want to go with. You want to use that very wet writing pen. It puts down nice color. It is a very readable. It's not painful on the eyes. So as the yellow goes, this is at the top. This is a fantastic yellow ink. 8 seconds to dry, which is not horrible. On the medium, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, none of that. Look at that color variation. Look at jumps. Easy to read, definite amounts of color variation. We get the same thing going on with the quick, brown, all of it. 14 seconds to dry. The scrubby doesn't show nearly the color variation that we would hope to get, but when we look at the smudge, there's no recovering this. You smudge it, it is gone. Part of that is because it is just such a light ink. Moving on to the Tomoe River.
We have no bleeding, no ghosting. Such a light ink, there's actually no ghosting on Tomoe River. At the 1.1, 1.1 on the top, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Not really much shading. That's common on the Tomoe River. In the extra fine, we start getting little bits of shading when we look at the. It occurs in the quick, so we do get some shading with the extra fine. Less inks going down. We get it on the Fox. Didn't get too much on the brown. So we do get a lot of it through the writing. 15 seconds to dry. We go to the medium. We have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Much darker color. And with it, we get a lot more color variation. Just look at how that 2 goes. It's very light at the top to much darker on the bottom on the 22 seconds to dry. So this is a great yellow ink. Can't say that for too many yellow inks. Most of the yellow inks you're going to look at, they're just horrible. In the scrubby, no color variation whatsoever. And when I looked at the smear, there's no recovering it. Rhodia. No bleed. No ghosting, very light ink. Looking at the 1.1 at the top, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We get color variation, we get our shading. Moving on to the extra fine, a ton of shading that goes on. So that's fantastic here. We see it a lot in the F for where I just put the extra fine. The that gets it, quick gets it, brown gets it, fox gets it, every word gets it. 10 seconds to dry. And this is not painful on the eyes. You're not reading it and dying to do it. Medium. It gets darker. It almost gets towards that orangey yellow. Just towards it. A lot of shade goes on. There's no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, none of that stuff, but great shading. In the scrubby, we start to see some of the color variation for the extra fine. Not as much for the medium. Again, on the smear test, I wouldn't be able to recover it. Now, I only have 3 writing samples for this. And what happens is, when I get into some of the samples and I'm sort of not expecting a lot, I don't test other papers. I only test my standard 3, where let's see if I can get it. These are the most commonly used. I don't see this as something somebody's walking around with as in their pen for their notebook. For their pocket notebook. But this is not bad. This is a good yellow ink that you can actually see.
Instead of finding inks that look like Diamine Amber, I would prefer to find an ink that looks good on the page with it. With Diamine Amber being a yellow to brown ink, it's like a light brown with that yellow. I've chosen a brown, specifically the Colorverse Space Laika, because it is a nice dark brown. But not too dark. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I'm asking, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. And if it is your first time here, I'd invite you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I put the ink into a different pen for a day and write with it that whole day. I then put it into another pen. Today, that was the Noodler's Ahab, in order to take my notes for this video. So what do I think about Diamine Amber? I was unimpressed for a long time until I put it into that Ahab. I started getting a lot more of that brown out on the brown out. So I started getting much more of the brown with the yellow, which made this beautiful to look at, and very likely my favorite yellow ink, which is like a phrase I don't know people would really expect to say. So now the big question, would I purchase a bottle of this ink? Unfortunately, no. I don't get enough use out of the yellow inks, even with it having a very nice color on the Noodler's Ahab. I don't know that I'd get enough use out of it to use a whole bottle. I'd prefer to continue buying this one sample at a time as I choose to use it. Thanks for watching.